On November 20th, 2019, the 2020 Democrats, or at least the top 10 of them, met in Atlanta, Georgia to conduct the fifth Democratic debate. It was sponsored by MSNBC and the Washington Examiner. Just to give some brief comments on the moderation, since I think that is necessary to understand the larger context of the debate before moving into the specifics. This really had a fake, crappy feel to it. It just felt low quality and rushed and forced. There was a lot of focus on impeachment since MSNBC has been driving the Trump is going to be removed from office against his will narrative since the very beginning. So they are trying to paint that as the number one issue in America, even though voters by and large are rather indifferent to the issue. So there was a little too much attention paid to that in a 2-hour format where previous debates had been 3 hours, so a lot of time was wasted on something that most voters don't really care about. And unlike the previous debates, this one was tightly controlled and managed. A lot of people in the past called for that. However, this one ended up feeling like it was an overreaction to the earlier perceived chaos. In this case, what we saw was rather than allow debates to emerge in an organic fashion, what the moderators did was drive most of the conflicts that broke out. And there were some of the conflicts that made literally no sense. The moderators set up Bernie to debate Biden at one point on the issue of whether Trump should be prosecuted for crimes or whether that should be left to the Attorney General, which is a distinction without a difference. It's just talking about processual politics. And I don't think they had really a disagreement, but they were kind of forced to create a difference out of thin air, and it was just awkward and weird. And that's just one example. There were a few other exchanges that were a lot better than that, though. Now, just to spoil the whole thing, the big winner was Bernie Sanders. I think he clearly walked away with this one. I'll get back to his performance in more detail. He was the big winner. Joe Biden, we'll talk about him in just a minute, biggest loser. And everyone else finished a little bit in the middle, although I think that there were 4 other clear losers, and then 4 people who finished a little bit in the middle, didn't really make any progress or lose any ground. So first, let's go to the night's big loser, Joe Biden. Even though it was only 7 years ago, Joe Biden is a shell of the man who destroyed Paul Ryan in a vice presidential debate. He clearly has lost a lot of steps, not just one step, and it really showed tonight more than it has in any previous debate. In previous debates, he's shown some slippage, but also had a few cogent moments. In this debate, there was only one good moment for him, and that one came literally out of left field. Tom Steyer was grandstanding on climate change, and then Joe Biden struck back hard. At first, he was meandering about, "Don't lecture to me, I'm the most accomplished person in history," and then he finally got around to Tom Steyer's background as someone who invests in coal. And that by itself was enough to wreck Tom Steyer's night, because before that he had been doing fairly well, at least as long as people who would think about voting for him didn't look him up. But anyway, with a single blow, Joe Biden ruined an otherwise mostly solid performance by Tom Steyer. Other than that, though, Biden's performance was absolutely terrible, and it was easily his worst, which is saying a lot, because Biden has put in some real stinkers in the 2020 cycle. His syntax was broken, so a lot of his sentences, if you were to read them on paper, would be grammatically incorrect. If you put them in Microsoft Word, you would get a lot of red underlining. He actually at one point stood still while Bernie slammed him on his Iraq war vote, and he just let it happen, didn't respond, didn't really seem to notice even. He also took a hit from Cory Booker, and Booker is not a good debater and just simply not a good politician, but he allowed Booker to slam him on the issue of weed, and then he tried to make some version of the gateway drug argument, and it just sounded terrible. So he lost an exchange with Cory Booker, and if you're losing an exchange with Cory Booker, you know it's not your night, because Booker is someone who should be the first Goomba you encounter on the first level of the original Super Mario Brothers. He also had that one dumb argument with Bernie that didn't really go anywhere. Biden talked about civility. I've seen a few articles since that say that he won the debate by talking about civility. That is not what I saw on display. You would have to really just pick out the words out of the word salad to make what he said even make sense. He also ended on a weird note by, well, okay, before he did that, he had a really funny gaffe. He was talking about dealing with women's issues, and he said that we really need to punch at these issues and get them done. So That was some great imagery that he promoted for everyone. Uh, I guess he was thinking about trying to prevent women from getting punched, and it was just on his mind. So, yeah, that was pretty funny. He ended with a pretty weak pitch, I guess you could say, if you want to call it a pitch even. He went directly after Elizabeth Warren, who had talked about we need to end corruption in Washington to get stuff done. And then he decided to stand for Obama by saying, well, I hope you're not including Barack Obama in that because he was not corrupt. He was a great president. He did a lot of great things. But Trump is corrupt. And then he rambled on and talked about people giving him money. Very, very weak performance. He only had that one standout moment against Tom Steyer. But yeah, I would say that okay, so the one reason that I put him by himself rather than the loser category is simply because Joe Biden tends to not take hits from debate performances. And even though his performance tonight was absolutely atrocious, I doubt that he'll see a big downturn from this if history is any indication. Now for our regular run-of-the-mill losers of the debate. There are 4 of them. Up first is Tom Steyer, the aforementioned. This billionaire needed to both hold off Bloomberg as the novel billionaire in the race and then make a case for himself in some way, either as the climate guy or as someone who's serious about fighting corporate power and corruption. He got off to a pretty good start. Tom Steyer is actually a fairly skilled speaker and debater. However, he made a massive error when he decided to contrast himself with the big 4 candidates, that being Bernie, Buttigieg, Biden, Warren. And in various questions he would invoke their names. Well, of course, the moderators eventually called on Joe Biden to counter what he said. And I imagine Steyer felt pretty safe given how far deteriorated Biden's brain is. But then Biden had his one awake moment of the night and managed to slam Tom Steyer in the last week. And that by itself was enough to break up an otherwise competent performance. Steyer had no real standout moments before that, but at least he sounded like a real candidate, and he tried to show how he as a billionaire was doing positive things with his money to get things done. Andrew Yang praised him at one point before that, but then in one fell swoop, all of his work fell apart because Joe Biden finally woke up. Another loser of the night was Cory Booker. I will say this was probably one of his best debate performances of this cycle. However, we have to remember that Cory Booker's standards are pretty damn low. He got in one big hit on Biden on weed, and he had some high-flown but reasonable-sounding rhetoric at times. He tried to steal an argument from Harris and just literally stole it like 5 minutes after she said it about being black in America. He was pretty bad overall, just like normal. But what really killed him, I think, and what will probably make him not qualify for the next debate, is that after what was for his standards a strong performance, he ended by literally groveling for donations so he could stay in the race. And I'm not kidding. It was literal groveling. He kept talking about how you need to go to his website and give him money because otherwise he's not going to make the next debate, and then there won't be a black man in the race or something like that. It was pretty bad. And then he had some rhetoric about John Lewis and the Civil Rights Movement, which would have been fine as a closer, even if it didn't have all that much substance. But prefacing all that with groveling, that I think in itself made him look deeply unappealing to voters. And at this point, the kind of people who would give him money are not willing to if they think that he is a lost cause. And any candidate who will go into a debate and beg for money to reappear at the next debate is not a worthy cause. Another loser of the night is Cory Booker's sometimes ally, sometimes opponent, Kamala Harris. Kamala had one strong point in the night. She won an exchange with Amy Klobuchar over family leave, and she argued for the real conditions that women face in the workplace. She invoked the gender pay gap a lot. Many people have refuted the statistics that she kept putting forward, but she hammered them home like 5 times anyway. She tried to attack Tulsi on being an Assad apologist. Of course, some of the establishment media says that, she really landed a huge hit against Tulsi, but she really didn't. It was pretty bad on Kamala's part. I mean, Kamala, to be fair, she's always shit in these debates, at least since the first one where she had an outlier performance and massively overperformed her actual ability. But in this one, this I don't know if this was her worst one because it wasn't her weakest one, but in terms of substance and being ultra repetitive, this may be a contender for worst performance from Kamala. It's got to be up there. She called herself champion of the people several times and said that she has never worked on behalf of corporate interest or special interest, which I guess is technically true if you look at her career, but if you look at who she takes money from, it's definitely not that accurate. But the most cringy and easily refuted thing that she kept saying over and over and over, she kept talking about the need to rebuild the Obama coalition and how we need someone who can reconstruct it, and she kept saying that was her. All anyone would have to do is to point out her polls and head-to-heads with Trump and hypothetical head-to-head matchups. She clearly cannot reconstruct the Obama coalition. She has no appeal in the Midwest. She has no message on labor. She doesn't even appeal with the black community. So, she's trying to make an electability argument that she has no data to back up. All literally anyone would have to do to finish her off would just be to ask for a citation or a poll which would back up what she's trying to claim, because she can't possibly back that claim up. So she might also not make the next debate. I'm not sure where she stands. I imagine she'll make it, but she'll keep sliding if I had to guess. And the final loser was Amy Klobuchar. Now, Klobuchar is usually good enough as a debater to break even, but I'm pretty sure that she was sick tonight. If you look at her closely, she was trembling. And at first, my girlfriend and I were speculating whether she had Parkinson's or something, but then I thought about it. She's exposed to the cold campaigning. She probably has a fever, so she felt cold and she was shivering. And she also seemed very low energy for her standards. She wasn't very aggressive. She spoke a little slower, so I feel like she was pretty clearly ill during this debate, but she soldiered through. I mean, if you can eat a salad with a comb, I suppose you can debate with a fever. She just talked about managing expectations and not promising too much, and it was just kind of boring and very forgettable. Other than the trembling, she didn't do or say anything that I found remotely interesting or memorable. And she's someone who really needs to gain ground fast, or she's done for, and she did herself no real favors tonight, so she is also a loser. Now for the four candidates who managed to break even, who will most likely continue on their current trajectories and neither gain nor lose anything of value based on their performance tonight. First up, Elizabeth Warren. One thing I noticed about her performance is that she tried to tie as many of her answers as possible back to race in order to appeal to voters of color, a demographic with which she has struggled. And she also had a central theme of combating corruption. Those are all good things to talk about, and it is good to try to expand your base, but she didn't really have any standout moments which will really go down as memorable. And even the establishment press, which is often favorable to her in just the few stories that I've read so far that have been released, haven't highlighted any great Elizabeth Warren moments or talked about any of her standout moments. She also didn't have any standout bad moments. She didn't really take any attacks during the debate, at least not any that were meaningful. So she was there, and nothing really happened with Elizabeth Warren. Tulsi Gabbard, in my opinion, also broke even. You have to remember she already has sky-high negatives due to being smeared repeatedly, so being smeared again on the Assad thing by both Kamala and Pete Buttigieg really doesn't move the needle. People have already heard these accusations, they're just hearing them again, and Tulsi actually had a chance to defend herself in live time, and she did an okay job at that. I wouldn't say well enough to refute them. And if you're someone who doesn't follow politics closely and you just hear this repeated over and over, I imagine you'll believe it even though she tried to refute it on stage. One thing she did for herself that would have been very positive given other circumstances, she kept her composure completely even when she was in the heat of battle with Kamala, who appeared somewhat angry, and Pete Buttigieg, who was really losing his shit at one point when he was going against her. She looked very presidential. She seemed poised, confident, and I've said this all along, but if you're just talking about who seems presidential, I think Tulsi is the winner of that category out of this entire field of a million people. She always seems unrattled. She has that certain quality that's hard to define of always exuding confidence and self-assurance. But because of all the smears she has endured, of course, she has no real chance. I could even see her gaining stuff from this debate simply because she held her own. She has improved her rhetoric. She got to answer a wider variety of questions than in previous debates due to the better distribution of speaking time. So she got to show her range a little bit. She got to talk about some other issues, including climate change. And she also launched an attack on establishment foreign policy, hit Hillary Clinton while she was doing it. That's something that will resonate with a lot of voters who don't hear that nearly enough. And she also hit Pete, so she got in a blow against him. It was a little bit of a glancing blow rather than what I was looking for, since I have to tell you, I had high hopes that she was going to give him the AAA spine buster tonight. She tried, she didn't pull it off, but I have to give her credit for trying. Another person who broke even tonight is Andrew Yang. Yang had no real moments, and his performance in many ways is a lot like Elizabeth Warren's. He came off as personable, and he also came off as comfortable on stage. In previous debates, he seemed a little out of place, but now he seems like he's in his element. Unfortunately for him, he didn't really land any points or have any memorable lines or talk about new policies. He had a couple jokes that landed, though, and he talked about his family and stuff like that, which is good, but I think someone who's just watching this debate and hadn't been exposed to him in the past would just think he seems like a nice guy, and then they'd have no idea what he actually stands for. So, break even. I can't really see him getting much or losing anything from this. And last is Pete Buttigieg. There have been a lot of polls coming out that he's been surging in Iowa and New Hampshire despite having a literal rating of 0 among the black community. He had lots of time, it felt like. It was more balanced than in the past, but he seemed to have a little more time than most of the candidates. Maybe it's just because he is deeply annoying and it felt like he had more time. I don't know. The moderators tried to set up some artificially imposed debates between Pete and then Harris and Klobuchar on issues of race and gender, but both of them declined to take the bait and go after him on these issues for whatever reason. In Klobuchar's case, I'll actually give her a pass because, again, I'm pretty sure she was ill during this debate. Harris really needed to throw some punches and get herself back in the game, and she declined to do that. I assume that one or both of Harris and Klobuchar are now secretly kind of working for Pete in exchange for some sort of political favor, since he clearly has a lot more momentum and juice than they do. So it kind of makes sense to do that, especially when both of them are arch opportunists. What I will say about Pete, because all the establishment press says that he ran away with this debate, he was awesome and blah, 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 and he slammed Tulsi. None of that shit happened. That's completely untrue. What did happen, though, is that he made himself look kind of weak in his debate with Tulsi. Tulsi kept her composure while he was trying to smear her about Assad, and she hit him over some stupid comments he made about Mexico, and rather than keeping his cool and talking about the context, which he should have done, and he kind of did it, but he lost his cool while doing it, he came across as very snarky and very nasty, and he just seemed aggrieved and annoyed, but not in a charming way, in a very sort of vicious way. He just seemed like a dick. And it just made him come off as thin-skinned. It's kind of like when he was asked why he was polling so poorly among black voters, and his surrogate said that because black voters are homophobic. It's kind of like that thing like Hillary always does of shifting the blame on the other people and refusing to admit fault or some sort of personal shortcoming. So he showed the other side of his face tonight, and it is not pretty. If anyone was watching that, I'm sure that they caught on. Pete usually comes across as very pleasant and even, but he did show his dark side, his Mr. Hyde, if you will. He also has a new rhetoric of trying to paint everyone else as Washington or ineffective, but he is just a small-town Midwesterner who has common American values and has actual experience on the ground both as a soldier and as someone who lives in real America. No one hit back on that. Somebody should have tackled him over that. Cory Booker tried by pointing out that he used to be a mayor too, but ultimately Buttigieg got away with a lot of bullshit here.
However, he came across as mostly unlikable, and he didn't really have any standout moments. So I don't think that he did anything that will fundamentally change his race. Also, speaking of that whole Washington talking point, Buttigieg famously is a McKinsey consultant, so he literally is Washington. He just happens to live in southern Indiana, and somehow he's able to get away with that. My biggest regret of the debate, as I said earlier, I had high hopes that someone was going to take him behind the woodshed, and no one did. Maybe next time something will actually happen.
In the past, it seems that I have largely thought less of Bernie's debate performances than most other people who watched the debate and then went online to talk about it or comment. But in this case, I almost feel like maybe my opinion of Bernie's performance is a little bit higher than a lot of other people's. Nonetheless, I say that Bernie walked away with this debate, and he did so with ease. He was the only candidate who got to talk about a wide variety of issues, express his stances. He took no hits. He even gave a couple to Biden, but mostly as someone who is one of the frontrunners, he had to make his points and then try to convince people to come over to his side. He did a good job of laying out his case. And my only complaint about Bernie's performance is that he didn't manage to go after Pete, but given that that was Tulsi's job, I'll give Bernie a pass. So Bernie's main message that he repeated at the end and really summarized is that he's been a warrior for everyone's cause for over 50 years. He talked about civil rights, and he came across as genuine and someone who has a broad platform, someone who has an answer for all of the problems that America faces. In previous debates, Warren had more of that broad appeal because she got to speak on all of her various issues. This time, Bernie ended up getting that treatment, although a lot of that was due to the way that he engineered his answers. So he did an excellent job, and in terms of his tactics, he's normally not very tactically smooth, but in this debate, he did pretty damn well. He stole the climate thunder that Steyer was trying to build. So basically, Steyer was trying to run down the court and get a layup on climate change. Biden somehow blocked the layup. Bernie got the rebound and then dunked it. So Bernie stole all the thunder because what he did is say that the question itself was flawed, that the moderators had asked about what to do about climate over the next several decades. He said, no, we have exactly 1 decade. So he made the issue urgent, talked about his plans, talked about his record, and he made himself the serious person on climate. So he really stole all of Steyer's remaining thunder. And if anything, even without attacking Steyer the way that Biden did, Bernie stole all of Steyer's credibility in one fell swoop. He also got to talk about foreign policy, and back in 2016, this was a weakness for Bernie. This year, he also has to worry about losing foreign policy voters to Tulsi Gabbard. However, he had the strongest message on foreign policy in this debate. When he was asked about Israel-Palestine, he said that we need to be balanced and also make sure that we protect the Palestinians. That got a lot of applause. He said we need to end the war on terror. That was something that he brought up on his own, and he got some applause for that too. He also talked about how Biden had voted for Iraq and the first Gulf War, and he didn't. So he was able to reinforce his credibility as someone who has a strong stance on being anti-war, and also his credibility on making past judgments on foreign policy. He was asked a leading question which was designed to trip him up. The question was, would he get us out of Afghanistan if that meant making a deal with the Taliban? The mainstream media likes to make it a cardinal sin if you're willing to sit down with one of America's enemies. I mean, that's what they keep hitting Tulsi over and over, is that she sat down with Assad. And Bernie, much to his credit, said, yes, if it meant getting us out of Afghanistan, I would sit down with the Taliban because we need to get out of there. We've been there too long. We haven't accomplished anything. I feel like that was the perfect answer for that audience. The Democratic voters and also Americans in general are ready to be done with the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. We've been there for 20 years. We clearly have not accomplished anything. It's time to go home. So Bernie also kind of stole Tulsi's thunder too. And by talking about his past support of every movement from the civil rights movement to the present, he also kind of cut off the claims of Corey and Kamala and the rest who claim to be
champions of civil rights in the black community. All Biden could say about the black community is that some of their voters like him. But Bernie can actually talk about things he's done that are positive. So I feel like if you just look at what he needed to do, what he could possibly do with the time he had, it would be hard to improve upon this. Again, the only thing he could have improved on is getting in a solid body blow against Pete. But you know what? I would say it's still a solid A performance. He would need to get a hit in on Pete to get an A+, but still solid A. Good stuff. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Who do you think won the debate? Who do you think lost? And who do you think came in somewhere in the middle?